Like so many others, I joined the military because my country beckoned me. Ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. But when we're telling the truth about our love, our country slaps us in the face and orders us don't ask and orders us don't tell. Well, I am telling you that the era and the time for asking is over. I am not asking anymore. I am telling. I am telling. I am telling. Will you tell with me?
And that is it will always be our greatest asset in the gay community, is our integrity. And that's why it is so compelling still when people come out, because it is an act of truth-telling when they've been told their whole lives, some of these closeted gay people when they're coming out, that nobody wants to know about it. Why would you ever tell anybody about it? You're ingraining in yourself that it's such a negative. And then to shed that all away in one moment, in each moment that you come out. That's why it's still very compelling to come out.
In the past 15 years, more than 12,000 servicemen and women have lost their jobs for the same irrelevant reason. They have the gay. That means our military is made up of the straight and the closeted. In January of this year, in the Army alone, 11 more gay soldiers were discharged. Now, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was the tragically flawed result of President Clinton's attempt to tiptoe through the political minefield of gay people being barred from the military during his first term in office. And while President Obama figures out just how to map his own way through that same minefield, one group is stepping up to help. They're calling themselves Knights Out. It's a group of 35 graduates of the U.S. Military Academy. Joining us now is Dan Choi. He's a founding member of the Knights Out organization. He's a graduate of West Point, and he's an Iraq combat veteran. Lieutenant Choi, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Wonderful to be here. I love your show, Rachel.
Thank you. That's nice of you to say. Now, Dan, I understand that you are an infantry platoon leader with the New York National Guard now. By founding this organization, that means you are violating the don't tell part of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Are you worried you could lose your job?
That's right. I am an infantry platoon leader in the New York Army National Guard, and by saying 3 words to you today, I am gay, those 3 words are a violation of Title 10 of the U.S. Code. It's a code that's polluted by the people who want us to lie, and basically they want us to lie about our identity, and it's an immoral code, and it goes up against every single thing that we were taught at West Point with our honor code. The honor code says that a cadet will not lie, cheat, steal.
This week, those 3 words cost Dan Choi his military career as well. He has received a letter from the U.S. Army informing him that he is being dismissed. It says in part, quote, "This is to inform you that sufficient basis exists to initiate action for withdrawal of federal recognition in the Army National Guard for moral or professional dereliction. Specifically, you admitted publicly that you are a homosexual, which constitutes homosexual conduct. Your actions negatively affected the good order and discipline of the New York Army National Guard." Joining us now for his first interview since being informed of his dismissal is U.S. Army First Lieutenant Daniel Choi. Lieutenant Choi, thank you so much for coming back on the show. It's nice to see you.
Good to see you face to face, yeah.
You knew there was a very good possibility that by coming out publicly on this show, you would get kicked out of the military. But I have to ask what your reaction was when you actually got the letter this week.
Well, when I got the letter, I was extremely angry. I mean, the letter is basically saying, bottom line, Lieutenant Dan Choi, you're fired. You're a West Point graduate, you're fired. You're an Arabic linguist, you're fired. You deployed to Iraq, you're willing to deploy again, doesn't matter. Because you're gay, that's enough grounds to kick you out.
The greatest punishment, I think, was the inability to go back, because I had tried to enlist 2 times. Once was public and once was very private. And many people in the military who were working at very high levels to keep me out. I had thought through all this. Does it take the pain away? No. but I went into this knowing full well that this could mean the end of my, This means my inability now to go back. I spoke Arabic. I did everything that I could to help fulfill the mission. You know, I wasn't perfect. And equality is not about one minority being perfect. It's about equality, that we all have the equal chance to be part of this great organization that protects our country, and I loved it. And it was hard for me to fathom giving your entire identity up, because that was what the military was. It's not just a profession for a lot of people. It consumes everything about you. It consumes you. And
why is it a problem getting it through the Congress? Because I just read the Constitution on this point. The Congress has the right to raise and support armies. Congress has the fundamental power over the Army. Go with the American people on this issue politically. What's holding them up? Why are no Republicans aboard this thing, getting rid of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell? Why don't they raise their hand and say, of course I'm for open service. The American people are for it overwhelmingly. Why don't the Republicans join the Democrats on this?
Well, I don't speak for any particular political party. I think
but I'm asking you
that.
to analyze this issue.
In my analysis, I don't need to understand exactly why a certain politician votes a certain way. I just need to know that currently, under the law, I'm not allowed to tell the truth.
Right.
And I'm not an equal citizen. I come back from war in Iraq, and I'm treated as a second-class citizen. People take polls about whether I'm popular or not. I think that's an insult, and that's what I'm focused on. That might not be your direction,
well, that's
but I think it's very clear.
My question is to try to understand why they haven't done it.
Whether it's Congress or it's the president, these people are leaders who are elected.
Right.
And we all know that politics is war with no blood. War is politics with the blood.
This morning, Dan Choi gave me this to give to you. That's his West Point ring. He says it doesn't mean what it did mean to him anymore.
He earned this ring, and I'm going to give it back to him. I don't need his ring to fulfill the promise that I made to him.
When it's signed.
That's good enough with me. When the bill's signed, I'll keep it safely and give it back to him. Okay? When we get it passed, you'll take it back, right?
I sure will, but I'm going to hold you accountable.
Okay, that's good.
well, what drove me initially was hearing from other soldiers, other Korean Americans sometimes, that they're going through the same struggles, and they just felt that they could connect. Some said that they were suicidal and they had no answers to carry on. Soldiers in Afghanistan who said that they wanted to drive their Humvees off of cliffs, because they're gay and because they don't know how to come out and deal with it. And so this is very early on in 2009. So when we were initially just establishing our organization, the West Point LGBT group, I realized we had a bigger mission than just repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It's just not just a political thing, but because you have other people that depend on you. That was the initial motivation. It was deeply inspiring for me. I stayed up, pulled very late nights, answered every single message on my Facebook as much as I could, until I just got exhausted. Well, I just continued to be nonstop about it, and that's the only thing that I strategically told myself. You're doing this for the kids, and just say yes to every interview. One of the interviews that I had with the Associated Press made it into a local newspaper online in Lancaster, California, which was where my parents had a church. And so my parents ran into my room and said, we need to have a meeting about this, we need to talk about this. This was maybe 4 months into my being a public figure. And I was still living at home, and my dad said, you're turning my house into a gay headquarters, how dare you? And I said, you should be proud. You should be proud that you have this opportunity. I was still using the room, I was still living at home, I was still using my dad's cell phone for some of the interviews. So there were many difficult times during that period. And they didn't understand it in the same way that a lot of people who were cheering me on were understanding. So because of that, I couldn't really accept a lot of the compliments that many people were throwing my way, because I knew that deep down, closer to home, what hits closer to the heart with my parents, that area, that arena was really struggling, that it would take a long time to even undo some of the public figure stuff that I was going through. And that was a sacrifice that I had made consciously. And unfortunately, it required my parents to also have to sacrifice. And I considered all of that. And the worst feeling about all of it was feeling so selfish and making my parents go through all of that. But I knew that that's what was necessary in order to enact a larger sense of justice in the world. And so acting on their lessons that they've taught me, but maybe not acting in their best benefit, their best interests at the time. And I knew that in order for us to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell in that time frame, it was very time sensitive. We couldn't just dilly-dally around. We had to push our president to take action within that time frame, within the first 2 years. We weren't guaranteed Congress in that. So many political concerns. It all led to this fierce urgency of now. Now is the time. We had to get rid of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So everything was put on hold. Everything. My life, all my aspirations, what I would like to do, and we had to dive in 100%.
We have served our country valiantly in the defense of freedom and justice. Now it is time for our leaders to do the same.
Well, in Christianity we have this praise and worship song. This Christ in me is to live and to die is to gain, right? I felt, how much do I have to give up? Well, obviously I have to give up everything. And this was my mentality going into activism, treating with the same Christian foundational, the lessons of like, how do you tactically maneuver through life, this spiritual warfare. I was treating it very much like war, and I was going nonstop for 2 years. I didn't behave in a lot of the ways that meek Korean American Christians should, or what they were taught, to be so obedient and to fit in, to be polite. I wasn't always polite. I cussed sometimes, but when I think about what it means to be a Christian, it's not the external look of being a Christian that counts. It's really what you do to transform first yourself, transform yourself into the values that God imparts in all of us through the prophets and through Jesus, through those examples. And when I think about the lessons that I've learned through activism, I became a better Christian because of activism, even though I was being rejected by my church. And
we are a nation that welcomes the service of every patriot. We are a nation that believes that all men and women are created equal. Those are the ideals that generations have fought for. Those are the ideals that we uphold today. And now it is my honor to sign this bill into law.
It's a beautiful ring. You remember that?
But then on the day that we graduated,
Do you ever think you would get it back?
I didn't know.
Well, this is a very important day for you and our country. And also it brings such dignity, I think, back to West Point, which is a place I've been. It's a wonderful, wonderful place that has such a history to it. And today, not only do we return your ring, but the President signed the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
I want to thank you for your leadership and fulfilling your promise. I appreciate real leadership, and I know that it's been a long year, so you deserve the credit for your
Congratulations.
service. Thank you.
This is done.
Yeah, so we got through it, and we were successful in the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but a dark moment came again when I'd found, I had been neglecting so much of my personal growth, my socializing, with other gay people, friends. When all my friends were just, the people that I'd gotten arrested with, or political people, I didn't know if I was developing in that way. What happened to all my church friends? What happened to all my military friends? What happened to all of those parts of me? Is that all just dead? And realizing all of that gave me a lot of pain.
I have a message from the Middle East. انت حر أمام شمس نهار وانت حر أمام قمر الليل وكواكبه وانت حر حيث لا شمس ولا قمر ولا كواكب لكن انت عبد لمن تحب لأنك تحب وانت عبد لمن يحبك لأنه يحبك. You are free. You are free before the noonday sun, and you are free before the moon, and you are free before the stars, and you are free where there is no sun, where there's no moon, and where there isn't a single star in the sky. But you are a slave. You are a slave to the one you love because you love him. And you are a slave to the one you love because he loves you back. Gibran Khalil Gibran. Now I know that there are many things that are worth fighting for, and I've fought for many of them, and I will tell you that some of those are very, very expensive. But of all those things that are worth fighting for, love is worth fighting for. Love is worth it. Love is worth it.
All throughout 2008, I was experiencing love for the very first time. So coming out, we should make sure to know, just coming out to your parents is a big deal. But the coming out process for me took, years. It's still going on. I mean, 2008, I meet my ex-boyfriend, and we are falling in love. I decide to get out of the Army. Can't go into work every day and have to lie about it to my fellow soldiers, to my friends, to my colleagues, my superiors. And actually, I broke up with him about a month before I came out to my parents. Got back together with him a few months later. But I was afraid that my parents would blame gay on him. No, I came out to them before I came out on TV. My parents were almost the last ones to know, because that's how afraid I was of telling them. But I had already told everybody in my family, including my cousins, who many of them had told their parents as well. So it was already out there. And when I told them, I don't know exactly what was going through their minds. I don't know exactly what pain that immediately caused them. But I knew that it wasn't going to be easy for them. So managing my own fears of coming out and the consequences. What would my parents do to me? Would they kick me out? Would they just throw Bible verses at me? Would they, as they recommended, take me to a demonic exorcism? You know, well, I was always the favorite son. I never talked back to my parents. I went to West Point, and they were so proud of me. They were always bragging about me. And I knew that some part of coming out was sacrificing all of that, being their favorite, being their pride and their joy. And part of me wanted to take responsibility for that, feeling that I stole that from them, or that I had died somehow, and they were going to be dealing with the grief of no longer having the son that they thought they raised, the one that would marry a Korean girl, the one that would have kids that go to Harvard. You know, it was in my case, I wanted so badly to be accepted, you know, to be somebody that my parents could be proud of, to grow into that, knowing full well the entire time that you're going to have to come out to them eventually. In the beginning, during the first era of coming out to my parents, there was one time when my mom just, whenever I would say things that I was very much trying to tell her what it was like, how it felt like, and she would just laugh it off. That hurt me so much more than the times when she was screaming at the top of her lungs, you know, and saying, get out, you know, you have a demon. And that didn't hurt me, because when she was livid, when she was angry, I felt she finally understood my emotion. But it was the times when she was like, oh, haha, laughing, where it seemed that she wasn't even trying to understand, where she wasn't even, this is my mom, you know, not even grasping the basic understanding of where I was, what I was going through. It was very isolating, very lonely.
You didn't have other Korean American?
No, I didn't know any gay people. All throughout West Point, all throughout high school, middle school, I never met a gay person. I was so afraid to meet other gay people and to build a network because of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And I knew that if I showed some interest in Don't Ask, Don't Tell as a policy, or when I heard that somebody was getting kicked out at West Point for being gay. And when I'd overheard about it, I didn't want to know anything more. Because if I expressed any inkling of interest, then I'd be suspected for being gay. I came out and then I joined the movement very quickly. And I don't think, even to this day, that I have found real, you know, community. Of course, I've only been out for 5 years.
When did you come out to yourself?
Sure. I came out in my journal while I was on a Christian missionary trip, missions trip to the Dominican Republic, and we were all encouraged to write in our journals, and I finally, this was my 3rd year at West Point. I had told myself before that, oh, this must be a phase. I hope it's a phase. I had said, this is such a big sin. I hope it goes away, you know, and if I pray hard enough, then it'll go away. And it didn't go away through middle school. It didn't go away through high school. It didn't go away through college. And finally, in my desperation, I decided to come out to myself. And the moment that I wrote it, I felt so ashamed, I felt so bad, I felt so sinful that I took the journal and I was out in the wilderness, you know, I threw it as far as I could, and I didn't want to see it ever again. Many times wondered why I'd even written that, but it was so important for me to do that, to tell myself after so long, this isn't going away. And whether I believed, and I did believe at the time, it was a sin, whether I believed that or not, it was hurtful. I was in great amount of pain, and I just was so confused. How was I going to live the rest of my life? Was it worth living? And a lot of them just wished that I would, that I would disappear, and I would have never been born. And dealing with a lot of these feelings my whole life, really, because of the dangerous prospect of coming out. How would that change my entire existence? And then finally coming out under Don't Ask, Don't Tell and fighting for it, and I'm realizing my being Asian American, my being particularly Korean American, coming from a Christian background, son of a Southern Baptist minister, and now studying Arabic and being in the military, all of that combined wouldn't make any sense on any given day. Well, in the context of Don't Ask, Don't Tell and fighting Don't Ask, Don't Tell, all of it made sense. It was like, well, this was the reason why coming out and having all of those identities, speaking Arabic at a time when we needed them, being in the military, trained at West Point, and Korean American, being so rare as an Asian American on TV, it all kind of just worked together. And for the first time in my life, all of my disparate identities seemed to cooperate. And I didn't have to worry so much about, okay, well, I'll have to hide this part of my life from these people, and I'll have to not say this part of my life to these people. And it could just be, I'm telling all of my life to all of my friends, and if they don't like it, then too bad. And that was what was so empowering about it. Yeah, I was very involved in church. I was involved in many leadership roles in the youth group. And there was a great ostracism that came just because one person, it wasn't everybody came and ostracized me. It was just, I heard about one person who I had taught Sunday school. He went to seminary, and he came back to our home church and started preaching about how gay was so immoral and I was so wrong, and he's my generation. And so hearing about that, I didn't ever want to have anything to do with that church ever again.
And that's your father's church?
Yes.
Yeah.
My dad, he committed to reading about gay when I came out to him, and I said, "Wow, that's a positive sign." He came back with 8 Bible verses, and he said, "I've done my research." He said, "Leviticus, right?" We could go on and on about the exegetical analysis, about this was 2,000 years ago, this was a time of war, they needed mass and people and therefore reproduction, and so it became a political policy for them to say 2 men wasting seed, or even 1 man wasting seed, There's a crime, it's an abomination, and even the definition of that word abomination and how it is translated and mistranslated. We could go on and on about all of that, but in the end, the great lesson of religion is faith. And we have to believe and we have to know. And I think the charity and the compassion that we also must learn as Christians, those 2 things combined should hands down settle the entire debate. If you're not gay yourself, you should have faith in the other person and compassion to the other person who tells you that they've tried, it is not a choice, and they've prayed about it. And for me, in my situation, I prayed about it almost every day when I was growing up in middle school. Every time I had a thought, I was ingrained to think that it was a sin. And I think that's the saddest part of being a gay Christian, is having to tell your own church that they are wrong. That what Jesus did was he showed his love through his enormous sacrifice. And it is a sacrifice to understand somebody else. That's the basic sacrifice that you as a Christian can commit, and I don't see very much of that. Right when I came back home from war, I had had lots of bad nightmares. I couldn't sleep. I had many health issues, gastrointestinal issues, stress, hypertension, all of this. Survivor guilt, depression, anxiety, just going in these vicious cycles of worthlessness and what did I do, what was I part of, post-traumatic stress disorder. And so that's what it was like for me early on. But then I got involved in the activism, and a lot of the PTSD, I found it manageable. I found that there was purpose for me in life, and it was such a joyful feeling, and I felt so needed, and I felt that I was doing something so productive for society. And then it all came crashing down. There was so much that I was not ready for. And I thought that I was. The coming out to the parents was a major thing. And being rejected, or the feeling of rejection, whether it was true or not, from my former military colleagues, from people when I realized it would be very difficult to work in the Middle East anymore, being openly gay, and having studied and devoted my life towards Arabic. I wasn't taking care of myself. So December of 2010, I found myself in the psychiatric ward of the VA hospital in Massachusetts, and stayed there for a week. It was first of maybe 3 or 4, I think I've had 4 so far, hospitalizations, because I just kept going without stopping, without taking a break, sometimes without taking a break even for reflection or to regroup and to regain the energy. And so just keep going, because that was it was a very Korean American thing to do, to study.
Days.
That's right, and just keep studying for that math test. You never stop, and you have to be involved in all of these extracurriculars to get into a good college. To make your parents proud. So the stick-to-itiveness, perseverance, the commitment, all of that. All of these very rough identities, these Korean Americans very rough rough on ourselves. This military mentality, Christian mentality, my friend took me, I was staying with her and I'd stayed up all night, and she just asked me if I wanted to live anymore. And at that time, with everything, I just had to answer honestly, no. And everything that I had gone through, I was in the hospital, and I felt very much like everything that I had done in the movement had gone to shit. There was nothing left salvageable, because I felt being so damaged in that hospital, and losing it, just losing control, psychologically damaged, spiritually damaged. Military career completely damaged, my standing in society, that all gone to crap and falling apart completely. Even though I would get up on stage and get a standing ovation, that's not the kind of embrace and love that I really needed at that time. It was what I really needed was to know that my parents were proud, and every day of those years, particularly the first 2 years, where I was on TV all the time, I always remember my dad who said, I love you, but you're not allowed to say that in public, because I don't want people to think that I accept your sin, because the church won't allow me to say that. Which for me, I took a little bit of hope in that, as saying maybe he personally wants to, but his church won't let him. But every time that I went up on TV, I remembered that reminder. Deep down, dealing with the loss of your career and identity and hopes and goals, instead of saying, "Oh, I just have to redirect," and there's hope. It's just this: you're gripped by this feeling of hopelessness and this loss of your own self Even though your entire movement and your entire coming out and your entire mantra has been to bring your whole self into the fight, into society, into your family, and to talk about integrity and how great it was. At the same time that you could go up on stage and talk about everything has coalesced and everything has worked together, I was falling apart on the inside. And a lot of that, you know, I wished very much throughout a lot of that time. I'd wished so much that I could have a relationship with my parents. I looked at all my white friends that were like the activists or whatever, and so many of them had their parents that would go and rally with them, you know, and I didn't have that. And so I had told myself many times throughout the journey, throughout the fight, throughout the struggle, you know, this is just your lot in life, you know. There was a tough time to go through, and what kept me going, I would say, was part my military training, which had taught me not to give up, but also my faith. As my faith grew stronger through the coming out process, I realized very much that being raised Christian, fervently believing, and knowing the values of putting others before yourself, these values of honoring your parents. Those lessons, they don't disappear. They don't become irrelevant because you come out. Because some people choose to condemn you instead of embrace you. I guess more than anything that I learned from the journey was that limitation, the humanness, the realness of you have reached your boundary. You know, you have reached as far as you're able to go and remain sane. So that was the big wake-up call and the big lesson learned for me in terms of personal growth. And unfortunately, it took all of that for me to get there. And this is all part of that sacrifice. I have to tell myself in the lowest moments of, you know, picking up the pieces and the depression and sadness, feeling of worthlessness, that's all part of the sacrifice. You know, that unfortunately, we live in this society today that does not fully accept gay people. And by giving up, by showing how important our mission is compared to all the benefits of life, compared to all the niceties of life, you know, willing to give up all of that. That's the true definition of love, of unconditional love, that you would be willing to give that up, to sacrifice for the sake of somebody maybe that won't even meet you in your lifetime. It's hard, but love is not easy.